previously spoke in 2012, and I was asked to come out once again to talk about this topic as I progress with my activism, with debates, discussions, protesting, writing online, and mostly communicating with people who disagree, people who don't identify as religious or don't identify, or people who do identify as religious, people who do not identify as humanists. I think it's continually important to have good messaging and to do good public outreach. In addition to just writing online, I get involved in the community, talk to the media, hear newspaper articles, and I happen to be the face of atheism in the area very often, because many other people aren't out there speaking about these issues. And when getting involved with these topics, speaking about church-state violations, disagreeing on matters of religion, there will be people who can be very upset about that, complain that they are offended, that you shouldn't speak about this, that you're rude for disagreeing with them, that everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I'm not sure what that means, by the way. There's all these sort of conversational barriers that you will encounter. Some people can get quite upset about this, some people can be nasty. I hear all sorts of different approaches that people give. But when I talk to religious individuals and have these conversations, I try to turn it into a learning experience for them and for me. I don't go in assuming that people believe X, Y, and Z. We'll ask them about their beliefs. Well, what brings you here today? What is your background? Why are you religious? And I find this to be pretty effective. As one who's out in the public, I want to build good relationships with people I'm chatting with. If it gets too adversarial, they probably won't listen, they'll be upset, and these stereotypes that they have about atheists being nasty, about humanists not having any morals, if there's no objective morality from God, that this can come out. There was a recent event I was at where someone asked me, well, if you don't believe in God, then why is it that you get up in the morning? What's the purpose of you living? Why would you do anything in life? What is the point of doing this? And some people might get angry about this and say things like, well, I shouldn't have to explain this to you, or just walk away from the discussion, or lash back. But I find this to be a great moment to talk about these fundamental principles, to ask them some questions. One of the questions I typically ask people who engage in this reasoning is, if tomorrow you suddenly became a non-believer, would you not do anything in life? Would you not have any purpose? And they usually hesitate a bit and then kind of concede their position and say, well, actually, I have family members I live for, I have hobbies, I have all these goals in my life. So by just asking them the question seems to be pretty effective to disarm that kind of reasoning. It can get maybe upsetting when faced with these things, that people are just going out and tell you, well, you deserve to go to hell, you deserve to burn for eternity, essentially because you disagree with me. But after doing this for a while, after getting involved in these matters, maybe I was a bit naive when I first realized I was an atheist, identified as a humanist in 2009, thinking that, oh, this should be easy, these people will turn to reason so fast and abandon these ideas that they have, that hell is moral, this is justified, this is okay for this to happen. But over time, I realized that that's a little bit more difficult, that people have these cherished beliefs, they're going to hold on to them in most cases. But over time, although people wouldn't deconvert overnight, that's never really a goal of mine, I don't find it realistic, at least now. I do find that people modify their beliefs, that they say, well, I disagree with you on the church-state issues, but I think you're a nice person. I thought these nasty things about you, but after interacting with you, I no longer think that. I enjoyed these conversations I had with you. So you might wonder then, what is an effective approach? Can we measure what works? I think it's often pretty difficult to measure what works, especially if you're going to have a debate or this open to the public discussion, that you're not necessarily going to ask people as they're walking out of the door, well, what do you think about that? You often won't hear back from people. But you can hear some side conversations, you might see people in the future, and it's a good thing. At least leaving a good impression on people, breaking down stereotypes, I think is pretty effective. When you're in a teaching position or whether you're involved in public outreach, it can be difficult to measure what is successful. And there can be several different approaches. Some people will take more diplomatic approaches, some people will be more aggressive, if you will, with their messaging. I think all sorts of approaches can be effective to some extent. There can be some people, for instance, who will just go out to events and get into these big arguments with street preachers or something, and some people on YouTube might think those videos are funny. I do too sometimes, depending. And some people can get a bit over the top and retaliate. When a religious person says something that you perceive as nasty, you might retaliate and be angry at them. I don't find that approach to be very helpful. I find that creates an adversarial relationship. But some people will like that. Some people will say, well, I think that's funny, I find that effective. Maybe some satire and mocking can be good to cut down on some ideas people might reconsider. So I take more of a middle-of-the-road approach between being diplomatic and between being more provocative. Recently, I had protested a National Day of Prayer event and hung a banner that said, "Nothing fails like prayer." And when some of the event attendees saw that banner, they said, well, I think that's offensive, I think that's disrespectful. So I asked them why they thought the message was disrespectful. I said, was it saying anything nasty about you? No. Was there any foul language? No. Was this a personal attack? No. I said, okay, well, what is it? And the pastor went on to describe that we had our event here today, this was our day, and you have to put up a banner. Why couldn't you put up a banner on another day? I said, well, your event was happening and I wanted to respond to it. I think this was a peaceful response. It's not saying anything about you. It's talking about a belief that prayer, the supernatural intervention, is going to be effective. It's going to solve problems in government. It's going to inspire leaders to make the right decisions, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's very important to break down a distinction between the person and the belief, because when people find their beliefs to be so cherished, they often cannot separate themselves from it. So they see disagreement as a personal attack. And I've seen this in many other spheres, not only in talking about matters of humanism, religion, atheism, but in politics, talking about gender, talking about race. There are all these kind of things where if you disagree with a person, you're disrespectful. If you ask someone a question, you're a bad person for doing that. You can never have a good intention. And I find this to be really problematic. In some online spheres, people can just oust you, block you. It's really difficult to have a discussion. So I prefer the face-to-face discussion, as it seems to be more productive. I want to talk about why you view the disagreement as disrespect. I want to talk about why you are so polarized in this matter. And when I spoke to the pastor, I said, if I had a National Day of Reason event or some sort of free thought festival on Public Square, and you put up a banner that said, the fool had said in his heart there is no God, I wouldn't claim to be offended by that. So why is it that you're offended when I put up a banner in response to your event? And I think there's a big distinction there between both of us, the way that we're looking at this matter. I won't say I'm offended. I'll explain, well, here's why I agree with this message, here's why I disagree with this message. And there wasn't much of a conversation when he was taking that I'm offended line. And I've heard this a lot over the years, particularly from people who are more apathetic, even from some humanists or atheists. They'll say, why can't you just live and let live? Why do you bother? Why not just do your own thing? And I said, well, it's no mistake that my criticism is often of Christianity and religion and government, and not of, say, Wicca, because Wicca doesn't really get itself involved in government proceedings, at least not yet. I haven't seen that. I will live and let live in that department, but when Pennsylvania is declaring the Year of the Bible, National Prayer Month, National Fasting Day, the House of Representatives is involved with putting in God we trust in public schools and mandating that to happen, well, that's a lot of involvement. There's not much living and let living going on there. If they were to do that, then I would just sit. I wouldn't really care. I'm not going out and protesting masses or religious events, but when you are having an event that is encouraging government to get involved in religion, and the government is endorsing a day of prayer, then I will go out and protest. And what was the protest? All I did was come in there with a sign, talk to people about the separation of church and state, and I even let people approach me. I didn't even approach people. They asked me questions, and we had the conversations. So I think that was an effective way to go about things. I wasn't going in there shouting. I wasn't being disrespectful toward other people. We allowed the conversations to happen, and I find those productive. I see some of the same people at events. They greet me. They're generally pretty nice, and I found that messaging to be quite effective. but that's what works for me. It might not work for everyone. I was talking a little bit before speaking. I have some friends, for instance, who said they would get very angry with religious people. They couldn't have the conversations. And my advice for them is, well, if that's an issue and you are going to get really upset, then maybe that's not the medium for you. Maybe you can do something else. With my local organization, I had a person who worked on the podcast that we produced. And he did all the technical stuff. And he didn't want to be out there in the public. And I said, well, that's fine. You have your skills, you can contribute too. It doesn't mean that everyone has to be out there in the public. Not everyone has the same talent, not everyone has the same drive, not everyone wants to do the same thing. So for him working behind the scenes, that's great. People can maybe put together websites, people can come to meetings, support local organizations, go to conferences. There are a lot of things that you can do that don't require you to be in the public. So that is one way of communicating, using your own skills and evaluating what you think is effective for you. And when you get involved with the public, you should expect pushback. That when you're going to be interviewed in the media, people are going to come into the comment sections, you'll be called every name in the book, there'll be all these allegations about you, and that's sort of the price of being a public figure, unfortunately. When I first got involved in 2009 in a church-state issue in my area, I was a college student, and there were people saying, well, you should be expelled from college. There were people from the college who were threatening me with violence. I reported these threats to the authorities on campus, and I was really surprised by this. I thought there would have been some pushback, but the level of pushback was pretty intense. And looking back at it, maybe I didn't respond to it appropriately. I was being a little bit snarky with the people and a bit crass and everything, and today if that were to happen again, I would just talk about the issue at hand and why was it that I made the objection that the religious displays in the courthouse grounds were inappropriate. I asked for a more inclusive display, but there shouldn't be an exclusively Christian display on the courthouse grounds. I don't think the government should get involved in that. So I would talk about the issue and not so much make it about the person or talk about their beliefs in that case. When we're talking about separation of church and state, I find it important to keep on the topic. As I said, some religious people, even over the years, have said, well, hey, I disagree with you on this issue, but I'll agree with you here. I think you're a nice person. So that's good. So if there will be religious people who agree on church-state issues, then that's a step in the right direction. And I think that's a good thing. So when you're getting involved in the public, you have to have that kind of attitude. You can expect pushback. It always surprises me when people, particularly in online circles, they'll make controversial remarks and they'll complain about the pushback. They claim, well, you know, I'm being harassed when someone disagrees with me. They'll construe that disagreement as disrespect, as I talked about earlier. And it's unfortunate that's the sort of climate that you get involved in when you're going to be talking about cherished beliefs, when you're saying things that would be viewed as controversial. You'll often get the pushback. So you should expect it. You can take it in stride and use it as a learning opportunity rather than being nasty toward others and not being an effective communicator. The right to opinion, as I mentioned earlier, is one thing that often pops up in discussions where people say, well, I have the right to my own opinion, that if I believe X, then you disagree with me. That's really not appropriate because I think that this is the way things are. Well, I would explain that to people and that there would be a contradiction. Well, if I have the right to believe X and you believe Y, well, we both can't be right? If they're contradictory beliefs, they both can't be true. And at that point, usually people will say, okay, well then they'll start talking about the reasons and get off that. I'm not really sure what people mean by a right to opinion, whether it's a legal right or a moral right. I mean, certainly no one's going to be arrested for having an opinion, but is there really a legal right? I'm not really sure about that. A moral right, well, what if you believe something that is not on good evidence, argument, or reason? Then maybe you don't have a moral right to do that. If there's so much disagreement on an issue, if there are counter-arguments, then it would be problematic to hold a belief that is not justified and true. I'm not really sure about the right to opinion. It really doesn't get us anywhere in the discussion, especially when all sorts of people have all sorts of different ideas about a belief. Well, they can't all be right? Although some people will say, well, there are different ways of looking at the supernatural. Everyone is kind of on the right track. And I say, well, there are very specific claims that people are making, and they're at war. They're all different. They can't all be true. I can't both go to a Greek version of hell and a Christian version of hell. It just doesn't really work. There's some apathy, too, within some people who would be humanists, atheists, however they identify. And when I come out in the media, I'm writing on my website about history in my area, they go with the live and let live thing, but also they try to shame you in that, oh, well, you're being nasty toward other people. Why can't you just let people have their belief? And I'm still confused about that, because me going out in the public talking about religious belief, church-state issues, whatever the case might be, I don't think my conversation is necessarily taking anything away from them. And if it did, then that would probably be a good thing. And the Bible, my favorite verse in the Bible is from 1 Peter 3:15. It says, if anyone asks for a reason for your faith, prepare a defense and do so with gentleness and respect. So the Bible commands Christians to have reasons for their beliefs and have the conversations. So I think it would be very biblical for them to have the discussion about the issues.
Could you repeat what you just said?
1 Peter 3:15. If anyone asks for the reason for your faith, prepare a defense and do so with gentleness and respect. So you can always throw that at someone if they say that they don't want to have the conversation or they're offended or whatever the case is. I also talk about it as a learning opportunity, that if you hold a belief that's so cherished that you think that is so accurate, then you shouldn't really have a problem defending it. You can have a conversation about that. Over the years, I've heard some interesting responses, particularly from...
Do you distinguish between belief and faith? What
Yes,
do you
so...
understand by those words?
Yeah, so with faith, people will usually say, they'll refer to the Bible and they'll say the hope for things that are not seen or their relationship with God. So I'll often get the definition of that. A friend of mine who's author, Dr. Peter Boghossian, talks of faith as pretending to believe things you don't know. I don't necessarily use that definition with people. I'll ask them what they mean by faith. What is it, faith? This will say hope, and I don't really think that's an accurate definition because they don't hope, as, again, my other friend, Dr. Peter Boghossian, says, they don't hope that Jesus walked on water. They don't hope that Jesus raised from the dead. They believe that. They say that it's a fact, this happened. So they'll talk about a personal relationship they have with God, or they'll talk about how I have faith. There was this one person at a recent event I went to who said that I have faith that when I push a light switch, that a light will go on. This might be a really bad representation of people who use the word faith, but this is just a common person off the street, so I think it's appropriate here. And I talk about, I've seen lights go on before, and this light switch has worked before, so I have pretty good reason to believe that it will work again. And if it doesn't work, I'm happy to change my belief and say, okay, well maybe the light switch is broken, or maybe the bulb has gone out. But will there be any cases that you will be willing to change your belief that God exists, or that a certain Christian doctrine is true? And some people will say, as a pastor did in a discussion I had recently, well, I'm not willing to change my mind under any circumstances. And I said, well, if that's the case, then it seems you're really close-minded. That if there were, say, a treasure chest that we found in the Middle East that was signed by all the apostles, and they said, well, we just made all this stuff up because we really liked our friend, and historians were able to date it back, and they say, well, actually, this probably was the apostles, and then we find all this contrary evidence, and maybe we find Jesus' body or something, right? There can be all these things that we can find, and I say, well, would you still say that you're not willing to change your belief? And the pastor, thankfully, hesitated there. I think that people will often say things like this, not really thinking too much about it. And in the same vein, I have a counterexample, that if I found a book that had all the details of my life that nobody could possibly know, my innermost thoughts, all of my dreams, my goals, my wishes, and maybe some family members would know some things in this book, but it was really, really descriptive. It talked about really, really early memories that I had, some things I did not reveal to other people. I found future chapters in the book that would happen to detail my life in future years. All this came true. I tried my hardest to prevent all these things from happening. They still happened anyway. I said, I think this would be a good start toward belief in at least an omniscient being, that some being knows my future, that they know all these things that happen in my life. I think this would be a good start toward believing in God. Another example might be like a 500-foot Jesus walking through the fields and the stars aligning that said, I am real, I exist. But Star Trek fans in the room might know that that could just be technology we don't understand. There was an episode of Next Generation called Devil's Due, where there was this woman who came down in a civilization and said, well, I signed a contract with your civilization 2,000 years ago or so, and now I'm here to fulfill that. You agreed to be my slaves. And look, I have all these powers and I can do all of this. Well, even there could be situations where we think that supernatural is explaining something that's going on, but it could just be technology we're unaware of or some other explanation. In conversations with religious people, I often hear this, well, the universe exists, you can't explain that. I have this explanation of God, and that's better than your lack of explanation, so that's why I believe. Well, just because we can't explain something doesn't mean we're justified in jumping to supernatural conclusions. And why jump to any specific supernatural conclusion? And usually they'll have a hard time responding to that one. The same thing comes with morality. Well, you can't explain morality, how people all agree on these certain moral facts or these moral truisms, and it can only make sense if there was a God and he imbued a moral law upon our hearts, right? So we can give the explanations, we can talk about, well, it makes sense that we're going to follow these certain rules in society, we want to get along, we want to cooperate, it's socially beneficial. As Christopher Hitchens has said, if the people who went to the mountain with the Ten Commandments didn't know that murder was wrong, they never would have got there to begin with. So I found that to be an effective thing to explain to people. There are some other benefits of having a positive message and having conversations with people as it etches away stereotypes. I mentioned earlier, people will think that humanists, atheists, all these bad things, there's no reason to live, want to do anything nice for other people. The debate versus discussion. It was interesting that I've had maybe 3 or 4 debates with pastors. And I really enjoy the debates because I have a philosophy background and I took debating classes. And I really enjoy it. I think it's just fun to have a debate. And I think it's pretty good, but it turns out in some cases to be a double press conference where it's just one person talking, the other person gets up. There really isn't so much interaction unless you have some sort of cross-examination session or audience question answer after the fact. It can get more open. I like the debates, but once I had a discussion, there was a pastor who told me, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm not familiar with debating, I'm not too good at it. I said, all right, well, let's just have a discussion. So we had a discussion inside of his church. About 150, 200 people showed up. It was a really good audience, mostly his congregation, which was fine. Some atheists were critical, and they said, well, it was a mistake to have it in a church because there'll be all these people in the audience who won't listen to what you have to say. I said, well, I don't really understand that. I think having people who disagree with me in the audience is the best thing. I don't want to just preach to the choir. All these people who already agree with me, it's not the optimal crowd. So we had the discussion, and after the discussion, there were many people who had questions, went over to my websites online, my social networks, and I thought it was pretty productive. People walked away with a happy feeling. Said, oh, well, I thought all these nasty things about you, and they weren't true. I enjoyed the conversation. It was a good time. So the discussion was really good, and I thought the debates were good too, as I'm saying here, well, hey, I'm not closed-minded. I'm willing to engage your ideas. I'm willing to talk about what I believe in a public setting. And let's have that discussion. So there are some people who won't be exposed to the ideas. As I was when I was younger, I was simply brought up in a religious tradition and I hadn't questioned it. And once I had questioned it, then the belief started to etch away. I started asking the questions. I was at a perfect place in a Catholic college, by the way, where I had all the discussions with ministers, theologians, professors. So it was a really nice place for that. So having these discussions in public, I think, can be really beneficial, even if you don't see a direct outcome. You don't hear from people, you cannot measure the success in that. Often meeting people where they're at is a discussion that's important. When you see people on the street who might not be so educated about their belief, you'll hear things like Pascal's wager, for instance. Well, what if you're wrong? Why not just believe? Because if you just believe, you go to heaven, and if you don't, then you go to hell, so it's better to just believe. This is really basic stuff. You probably all heard that and responded to it in 25 different ways, maybe. With people like that, I'm not going to talk about metaphysical arguments or get really maybe advanced with them and talk about things like theological fatalism, the idea that if God knows the future, there can't be free will. This is a really advanced discussion. I think in a debate, I use that argument, and I think looking back at it now, it might have been a mistake because many in the audience might not have really understood what was going on. It was pretty complex. So when I meet people on the street and have conversations with someone who brings forth a Pascal's wager, I'm just going to talk to them at their level and make the conversation so that everybody can understand and make it very accessible for people. I think that's really effective. So those are some of my thoughts, and I'll welcome your questions.
I gotta say this point. I have these friends of mine that want to be Christians, and they just say to me, well, you can't have any morals because you don't believe in God. How can you have any morals? You must be a murderer or something.
Right, yeah, I addressed that a little bit earlier, that usually the question I ask them is, well, if you suddenly stop believing in God tomorrow, would you just go out killing people? Would you just stay at home and do nothing with your life? Most people will usually say that. Well, actually, I have these goals, I have these family members, I have reasons to live, and they'll explain that they don't want to harm other people. Maybe they would feel guilty if they did that. They don't want to land in prison. They couldn't stomach killing another person. So I'll ask them that, and that will usually be pretty effective.
There's a book circulating. My granddaughter wanted me to read it, and my daughter is a fundamentalist Christian, and the name of the book is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Are you familiar with the book?
Is it Lee Strobel, I think, is the author of that?
It could be, yeah, I think so. And I attempted to read it because I thought I could have an intelligent discussion with her. The problem was that it's just replete with quotes from the Bible, so it begs the question of the whole biblical thing to start. So it doesn't give a reasoned approach. And I just wondered if you had read the book or if people talk about that, if you had any comments.
Yeah, I've heard that before, that I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And they'll generally point to the universe being complex, or how do you imagine that humans exist, and how could humans just come from nothing, or just come about. And these are a lot of misunderstandings that people have about evolution, which they'll say, this recent event I was at, there are lies in your textbooks, and how would you believe that? Evolution is just faith, and it's just an atheistic religion or something like that. And this was really out there. And I talked to them, again, what do you mean by faith? Have them define what that means, and then take the conversation from there. So I think that's an effective way. When they talk about the universe or some things that are difficult to understand or maybe impossible to explain, I'll just say, I don't know. I think that's a fine explanation. Or hundreds of years ago where people didn't understand how earthquakes happened, and they thought they would be some punishment from gods, and now we find out that there actually is a naturalistic explanation for earthquakes. So there's a really bad track record of the supernatural as an explanation. So over time we come to understand, maybe we'll never understand, but there's no good reason just because we can't explain something to say that the supernatural is to be blamed for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and another question like that is the idea that all high school students in this area, anyhow, maybe not in Texas, but they study the cell theory. And if you study the cell theory, then there can't be a cell unless it comes from another cell, and you keep going back. They just have no answer to that. They just say, well, that's just kooky science, or, you know.
Yeah, I hear this sometimes, and one reason I'll take is, well, there are many things that I might not understand about the universe. For instance, I don't have a background in physics, but just because I don't understand something, I'm going to go to what the experts have to say about that, and maybe I can evaluate that, but I don't have much expertise in that area. But if there are so many people who do, it's generally good to defer to the experts in that matter. There are several people, for instance, involved with the 9/11 truther movement, and they'll show these videos and they'll say like, oh, well, you can't explain how this building would fall down in a certain way, and because we can't explain this, it has to be some kind of government conspiracy or whatever. And I'll say, well, I actually don't know much about building construction. I don't know much about how this stuff works. So let's go to the experts who say it and then have a conversation from there. I think that's generally the effective way to go.
Yeah, I don't think it really matter that much whether we found out where the origin began anyway. Like, if they want to trace it back, like, what would that prove anyway? Like, I think the best way to respond would be to say that you don't need an answer. You know, you know what you know, and you'll find out more, but you don't need an answer to every single question ever. You can't.
Yeah, and then it goes back, I guess you could always fall back on, well, what created God? If everything needs an explanation, what is the explanation for God? And they'll say, oh, well, God doesn't need an explanation. Okay, well, maybe the universe doesn't either.
Yes.
That's usually an effective way to go about things.
I guess my concern is that when tax dollars are supporting religions, what do you see as a way to stop that? I mean, I don't think that churches, synagogues, mosques, etc. should be tax exempt. Do you see any way that we can change that?
Yeah, I get active with some of those issues. There's an issue that I'm currently dealing with. The Scranton School District in northeastern Pennsylvania signed a lease agreement with the Diocese of Scranton, which is a Roman Catholic organization, where the Roman Catholic Diocese would get money from taxpayers. Money from taxpayers would go toward the school district, and then religion would be funded by that. So that's one problem. The second problem with the issue was a part of the lease agreement said that no activity in the building may be contrary to the teachings of the Roman Catholic faith. So they're giving authority for the Diocese of Scranton to make decisions about the curriculum, school assemblies, dress codes, conduct policies, etc. And that's really problematic. So I work with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I contacted them. I send complaints to them very often with certain things in my area, and they're generally pretty good to work with. I don't have the legal expertise to send a letter, and my organization's pretty small, so people might just ignore us as they've had in the past. So I work with organizations to try to work on those issues. The tax-exempt status of churches is a really rough one. I think it'd be really hard for that to go away, because churches just get it passed that they're charitable, so that they should be tax exempt. Although some, like mega churches, they have these big libraries or daycare services or whatever. I think some organizations in some atheist organizations, humanist organizations are working on some of those issues, but I think it's going to take a very long time, especially with the Supreme Court decision recently saying that it would be okay to have exclusively Christian prayers at council meetings, to my understanding, if there are many who can be brought in. So we're going to see if the if comes true. I'm going to be going to a council meeting and asking if I can give a secular invocation before a meeting, so we'll see if that can happen. So I think it's important to just challenge these things in the community. It's probably going to take a long time for any of these issues to be completely changed if they ever do, but I think it's worth a shot of, say, stirring the pot, getting involved in the community, and challenging some of these issues.
What's the name of the organization that you said you turned to for legal help?
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, the FFRF. They're out of Madison, Wisconsin.
Justin, you said a couple of times, just for clarification, because what you're talking about is my bailiwick as a life coach, and I get into all this. And one of the things I've learned, and many things, I never argue religion. I'll have a conversation, I won't even debate it. But that, what you said is, people have an opinion, whatever that means. Why is, what's confusing about that?
Yeah, so people often in discussion will say, I have the right to my own opinion, and I'm not really sure what this has to do with the discussion. So if for some reason I ask, well, why is it that you believe, they'll talk about their background, and then, for instance, there was a recent discussion I had, actually, where this woman said, well, I grew up in a Lutheran tradition, and I think that that's just right for me because that's what I grew up with. And I asked her, again, not arguing, I said, well, I grew up in a Roman Catholic tradition, many people grow up in different traditions, and they think that's right for them, so how do we know who's right? And we had the discussion about that. Now, she didn't pull the right to opinion card, but I've heard that from many people, and maybe I'll ask them, well, what do you mean by that? It doesn't seem to be answering anything. All it seems to be doing is shutting the discussion down. It's not actually discussing the issue at hand. It seems that it's trying to eject me from the conversation, that I'm being rude by asking, or that I'm doing something wrong. Well, sure, okay, you can have your opinion, but the question is there good reason to believe it?
Well, what I'm hearing now is, the question is, people say they have a right. I hear that as underlined.
Right.
And may I offer what they're saying to you?
Oh, sure.
And again, yeah, they're defending themselves. That's it. I have, yeah, well, all right. Look, we all have opinions. And I think what you're taking to heart, and you're doing great for a young guy like you, is great. But the confusing thing for most people, where I come from, and I'm working, is defining beliefs. We say beliefs, and it just falls out of our mouth, and we don't really know what the hell we're talking about, because we confuse beliefs with truth, with honesty. and it's a confusion. So, and I've investigated beliefs, okay? And one of the things you may want to consider is that along with beliefs comes doubt.
Along with what?
Along with beliefs comes doubt.
Right.
And people don't want to hear, they're defending their religion.
Yeah.
Don't you see
Yeah,
that?
okay. Yeah, I see that. So, yeah, they grow up in this tradition where it's never questioned, and perhaps they're getting defensive. Like I said, they'll see it as a personal attack when you disagree with them.
No, perhaps. People are, they're not going to argue with you out there, but you'll get to, given where you're coming from, it's obvious that you're going to, it's not you offending, you're going to say something and they're going to get offended.
Yeah, so then I go to ask them what they're offended about, or what did I say, or what did I do. Another thing I often hear from people is, well, why can't you respect my belief? And I would ask for clarification on what that means, and that's another confusing phrase. Because when I talk about a belief, what's the definition of a belief? Generally, a good definition is a proposition that someone holds they believe to be true. So when you're talking about respecting something that someone believes, we talk about respect. Usually humans can be disrespected, that we can be disrespectful toward people, but a belief is just an idea. How could I be disrespectful toward an idea? That's really strange. And I've been asking people about this over years, people to explain the thing, to say, well, what do you mean by that? Let's talk about that. And maybe the people will think, okay, well, he's listening to what I'm saying, he wants to have a conversation, it's not adversarial, so that can be a good thing to do, to ask a question.
Well, and what would be great for you is to understand that people are bound by their religion to believe all the dogma. If you challenge the dogma, it's out, and people won't chance it. So that's what you're dealing with. To me, and I've learned this along the way, I do not argue religion. To argue religion is to doubt your own beliefs.
Yeah, most people won't do that, right? They'll just
Well,
stay steadfast.
So you just gotta get, hey, thanks for sharing that, don't believe me either. And I mean that, don't believe what I'm telling you, try it on. Yeah.
Can we move on to somebody else has been wanting to talk?
You mentioned the word belief, and you define it like a belief is a belief that something is true. But, you know philosophy, you cannot use the word belief.
Proposition is what I said. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. It's hard to avoid them. So maybe a proposition that someone holds to be true. I think exactly. Okay, yeah.
Now, with regards to, I heard the word right. I've got the right to this.
Right.
For this opinion and so on. Banded around all over the place for numerous times. But nobody paid attention to the word duty. And that's very key in everything you're discussing at the moment, in this way. You see, anybody who makes a proposition, a claim, has a duty to prove it. The duty lies on the person making the proposition. And therefore I find that saying, which my friend Eileen has pointed out, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, very, very appropriate. Because that's the same state did. I can prove that there is a prime mover, no more and no less than there isn't. I only tend to sway that there is, only based, like you, I did some philosophy, on the principle of cause and effect. And even that, as you know, is all kind of a little bit iffy. But at least that's the way I stand on this, that there is no, anybody making a claim that there isn't a prime mover or God, whatever you want to call it, then they have as much claim as somebody who claims there is. And why is that at least I find that common. That
Right.
Lord,
So I've heard this from people. They ask me, well, why are you an atheist? And sometimes I would say, well, I haven't found the arguments that religious people give to be compelling. And even if they give a cosmological argument or this argument from first cause or whatever, I don't see how it gets to a specific conclusion. There's one thing to say, well, there is a start of the universe. Okay, well, how do we know what that is? And we'll go into the discussion there, not just take it for granted. As far as the cause and effect stuff goes, this typically comes up on cosmological arguments. Well, everything that begins to exist is a cause. The universe begins to exist. The universe has to have a cause. Well, there's a really good thing you can read from philosopher David Hume. It's called Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. And it's a lot talked in there, and he talks about how, well, we see like from like, that in this world we see that when there's a ship builder, right? So we have previous examples to believe that there is a cause for the things that exist. But when we're talking about the cosmological level, at a universal level, we don't have experience of universes being created or universes starting. So I don't think we can reason from those principles of, well, we see a shipbuilder build a ship, so therefore the universe has to have a cause. We can't apply that same reasoning because we don't have that experience with universes being created. So that's usually what I go into when I talk about this.
Even in our experience, it's only inductive.
Right.
It's not even deductive.
Another question?
And this is short. I've reached the point where when people say to me, do you believe that? I just say, I don't believe anything. I'm convinced that this, or I'm convinced, and I just use the word convinced because it seems to be more specific than believe. Because believe is loaded with implications, whereas convinced implies that you have some evidence.
Yeah, sometimes I'll say best explanation or the best reasoning, best understanding, because there's a lot of confusion with certainty. And some people will say, well, you're an atheist, how can you be certain that a God doesn't exist? And I say, well, I'm not certain. I'm willing to change my mind on any given thing. I could be wrong about everything. So I won't say that I'm certain about it. I say it's the best explanation. Question?
And then, yes, just in response to all this about prime mover being as much possible as there not being one, the idea that is given for a prime mover is a great deal more complicated than is usually stated. Because it requires, I mean, when you say we don't know a first cause, we'll look for a first cause. The first cause of an atom might be an electron or something more simpler. But when people postulate a prime mover, they give, generally, they make a conscious being without any physical entity, and give that conscious being purpose, because it's not a matter of creating the universe the way a river created the Grand Canyon. It's a thought. And these things are very complicated, and they have not been shown to exist in anything other than in our world, living things, but anyway, in complex combinations of matter.
Yeah, it gets to be really complicated because they're not just saying, well, there's a creator of the universe, but they're also saying, well, he sent his son to die on a cross, and that he wants you to live a certain way, and all this added to it. So for a person to demonstrate that that's the case, it gets to be really difficult.
I just wanted to discuss with you text-mediated conversation that takes place in school in the United States. I'm pretty new to this country. The country where I come from is 98% Islamist religion, 98% people. And having worked there, I find out that it's the textbook which is taught to children in school and the conversation that revolves around it is very, very effective. It's very effective in promoting certain religious ideologies. And somehow or the other, we have secular-minded people who often interact among themselves, and I've seen that mostly the youngest person who are into these discussions is probably after 40s. So that the conversation does not come down to the young age where children can discuss these ideas. And the major issue that I found is that the textbooks are bureaucratic and they're approved by government authorities, and they're very strong regimental ideas that affect the children. I don't know about the United States if children are taught atheism or philosophy right from the beginning.
Yeah, Yeah, in like elementary school, high school, there isn't much talk of critical thinking or philosophy, and I would advocate a more open position. And some Christians will say, well, why is it that we can't teach the Bible in school? And I would say things like, well, if you're going to have a comparative religions class, if you're going to talk about the Bible as literature and have other books, then I'd be all right with that if it were implemented well. I don't think it necessarily would be, because there'd be many people who would kind of have their own agendas, and that might get problematic. But anyway, it would be nice to expose more children, people in high school, elementary school, to some critical thought, and even just kind of like, I work with students with disabilities in a work transition program, and we talk about conflict resolution, we talk about getting along with people, and this stuff really, I don't remember from my high school education. I don't remember talking about people skills, dealing with other people, having conversations. It was just memorize what was in the textbook and regurgitate it on test. It wasn't so much of thinking about learning or really much critical thinking involved, which is unfortunate.
Well, we don't educate. Really, as simple as that. Not an easy conversation. But to educate is to bring out our natural abilities. We don't do that.
Yeah, so I don't really know the answers.
Well, you just said regurgitate. I mean, this is insane. It diminishes our creativity. I walked out of school when I was 16, the day I became 16. And I was no dummy. And it took me a few years to look back. Why did I quit? And it became obvious to me that they were killing my creativity. Unconsciously, they were doing that. And our souls cannot tolerate that.
Yes, in college I found it a better learning experience, interact and engage with ideas, meet all sorts of different people, go to campus events, and I found the open discussion of ideas and the philosophy classes I took to be really nice, to start looking into ideas, start thinking critically, and start questioning.
Well, see, you just said something and repeated it, because I think you're pretty sharp about believing. I believe it's true, okay? Can't believe in truth. Something you can believe something or think about it.
Well, we can talk about justified true belief and what there is good reason for believing something.
Excuse me, for true belief?
Justified true belief, it's often a philosophical term.
No such thing.
We talk about,
You're going to generalize.
well, what is it that you
Like
give?
true religion?
What is it that you give a definition of belief for? How do you define the word belief?
Very good. Now here's my answer. And it was funny. You know who Alan Watts was? Zen master. He cleared it all up for me. And he said there's nothing wrong in believing. The problem we have is that we believe in belief. Now you think about that.
Question?
I would also mention that when you're taking a banner or a poster or whatever to object to some kind of meeting, I'm guessing that this meeting's being held not in a church or some religious area. I think there's an issue beyond. In some ways, you're a competing religion. And I'm sorry to word it that way, but
Right.
that's the way a lot of people will see it. But the issue beyond that is this occasion is being held on non-religious ground. If a religion wants to celebrate, it should be held on their church, their synagogue, their mosque. What we're back to, the government is promoting this.
Yeah.
And the government's job is not to promote any religion. And by promoting, let's say, day of prayer or Bible day, whatever you want to call it, they're making a religious occasion a government occasion.
Yeah, what
And
this
that's
is,
just what I object to.
Right.
I don't care what someone wants to believe, but don't make me pay for it, don't make my government pay for it.
yeah, in this case, it was a National Day of Prayer event that was run on Public Square in Wilkes-Barre. So as far as I know, people had to pay, the religious groups had to pay to rent the square, pay for electricity, pay and facilities fee. But I'm not too sure about that actually, because I filed right to know requests. If there was money paid for it, who paid the money, how much they paid. So the question is, are they getting preferential treatment? Are government people saying, well, you could just go and have this day, or are they spending money just like everyone else? If I were to have an event there, would I be spending the same money as them? So these are questions I asked. I filed an open records request with this. It was interesting what happened with this banner. Anyway, the banner I put up on Public Square after the prayer event the previous year, and this year I wanted it to be up on that same week. There were some delays last year, but anyway, this banner went up. There's a scaffolding structure in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania on Public Square. every time I've seen banners put on the front side of the scaffolding structure so that everybody can see. The reverse side has trees obscuring it. It's very much out of prominence. But the government officials put my banner on the opposite side of the scaffolding where people couldn't see it during the event. And when I saw that, I was thinking, wow, are they really serious? Are they really doing this? This is just insane that they're giving the religious views more prominence than my banner. Why are they not all put at the same side of the scaffolding structure? So I went to City Hall, had a discussion with the city officials, and I was told by City Administrator Wilkes-Barre that because they rented the event on the square, their banner was put in the front and mine was put on the back.
Did you pay?
The problem, yes, I did pay. It was $50 for it. The problem with that, though, is that there was another banner on the front of the structure that said May is Mental Health Month. So why is it that the May is Mental Health Month banner would be on the front and mine would be on the back if they paid for the event? So I filed right to know request to see who's responsible for both banners, who pays again. I'm digging into this. They said they had 5 days to respond to the right to know request. They invoked a 30-day extension, claiming that they were short on staff. I thought the request was pretty trivial, but government entities have the ability, they have the right to do that, to say we need 30 more days to respond. So I'm still waiting on the response to that, but it seems in this case that there was preferential treatment, that it wasn't a mistake that it was just put on the opposite side. There was more than enough room to put everything in the front. There was a St. Patrick's Day parade where 6 or 7 banners were on the front side of the scaffolding structure, so there was more than enough room. This business of they rented the events, they rented the scaffolding, also doesn't seem to make sense because people pay for the banners separate from the event. The event does not give people, as far as I know, priority on the scaffolding structure. So I objected. I went to city officials, talked about this. I've been writing a lot about it. The Freedom from Religion Foundation's on the issue also, because they helped with the banner. And I'm going to be going to the next council meeting to ask some questions about this banner and to ask to do a secular invitation for the meetings, or sorry, during the meetings.
Well, my question also would be though, is why is government property being used
Yeah,
for religious
that's-
purposes?
yeah,
I
that's
don't
the
care if
second
they're
part.
paying, they shouldn't be able to pay to use government property for religious reasons.
Yeah, I missed that part, sorry about that. What the FFRF stance on it, and mine is leaning toward, is that if the religious organizations are going to be on public square and they can use the property, that the best response is to put up messages of our own. And I think that might be best exemplified at the moment. An organization called the Satanic Temple is putting up, I believe, a statue of Baphomet in front of or by a Ten Commandments display. So they're saying, okay, well, if the Ten Commandments could be represented in front of the courthouse, then we should be represented too. And what's interesting is that Christian groups will complain and say, oh, well, that shouldn't be there. Okay, well, if that shouldn't be there, then why should your display? And perhaps they just think that because it's a Christian nation, or this is the majority belief, that it's okay for the Ten Commandments to be there. Some will argue it's part of the nation's history, et cetera, et cetera. So if one's not allowed, then nothing should be allowed. And let's just have it going completely out of the issue.
Is there anybody that hasn't asked a question that wants to? Jim? Okay.
I would go into a lot of different things, but primarily the historical significance of all of this discussion is going back thousands of years. And as we come forward, we had emperors, we had kings, and all of these people, they dictated what you believe. And all of this evolution socially gave us the modern day situation in America as well as Europe. And this modern day situation is implemented by individuals who have personal belief systems. And that's one of the reasons that you had a difficult time with that. And the same with you. You'll always see that. So what you have to do if you want to overcome something is you have to have one hell of a good marketing strategy. You don't have to tell them a damn thing about truth. You don't have to argue with them a damn thing about religion. All you have to do is have an idea and then promulgate the idea properly to win over the minds. And this is what they've done over eons of time. So, you can't argue truth. You can't argue fact.
That's an interesting discussion because having a more provocative message often gets more media attention, more people talking about the issues. I could have put a banner up that said separate church and state, for instance. but maybe people wouldn't talk about that. I think there can be good reasons for having a diversity of messages or going for a more provocative or more diplomatic route. There can be many approaches that can be effective with different audiences, so it's hard to just nail down this one approach that's good. Although I would draw the line at some point, and I had this discussion with the pastor. I said the banner does not say Christians are mentally inferior or Christianity is a lie or something like that. Maybe they could have more of an argument there, or Christians are mentally ill or whatever. They could have more of an argument there. I'm not putting up those messages.
What did your banner say?
It said nothing fails like prayer.
Nothing left.
Nothing fails like prayer.
Oh, ooh, ouch.
That's pretty
Whoa.
Yeah, so
You're
that's a
asking
little bit,
for it.
it was a little bit more of a provocative message, but the discussion happens. There are people who will come and talk, and the pastor said, well, this is an offensive message. And I said, well, he said, what would you like me to tell the people of my congregation about your banner? And I said, well, I would like for them to come and chat with me about it and talk about why they're offended by the message, and why not just have a discussion about it. And one thing I said is, if you're so certain, if you're so confident in your religious belief, then why would you be offended when someone challenges it? If someone were to challenge a belief that I hold, I wouldn't get very defensive. I wouldn't say I'm offended.
You're challenging their whole past. Don't you get that? This is who I am, you know. How dare you?
Right.
Maybe you could, you know, I'd appreciate it if I shared some of the things that I've gone, 82 years. I know some stuff about.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why I say I will not argue. I will not argue religion.
Right.
Believe what you believe. We can have a conversation about that.
All right, we have a question over here.
I may have done it the wrong way, I don't know, but I've been posting quite a few anti-religious things on Facebook. Now, they're not against any specific religion, but I'm using the Bible, and I'm saying, this is what's in the Bible, and I'm questioning that. One very good example, okay, because I don't want to take too much time. There was a poster that I posted, one half of it had Hitler, and millions of Jews killed under this man. We criticize him, we say he's wrong.
Right.
The other half had a symbolism of God, clouds and the sun coming through.
Right.
This God has killed millions, in Noah's Ark, millions, because he felt they didn't do as he wanted, except for his favorite person and his family and a couple of animals from each species. And of course, there are quite a few like that. And everything is there for anybody to say, no, Mom, you're wrong. But I had two people tell me they found it very offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And this was so offensive. Tell me what's wrong with this. Tell me what I did wrong. Why are you offended?
Right.
And I guess that's what we've been talking about all along. But then I started getting a little scared of posting these things. I'm not out to offend people.
Right.
I'm out to point things out to them that they're believing for years and years and years. I'm not even thinking about how.
Yeah, talking about marketing and being more provocative, I think some of the provocative messages have their kind of benefit. There's one company that talks about, there's commercials I've seen on TV where it's a family late at night, someone breaks into a house, and you should have a security system. If you don't, how could your family be protected or something? And there's some fear that's being used with that, and it's a little bit more biting. Oh, your family's in danger. If you don't have this, you're a bad person for not protecting your family or whatever. And the provocative message in that case can work and be effective. And there can be effective messages of, well, I think, let's have a discussion without putting that fear in, that it's good to have this service, that you can protect your valuables or something and not make it so personal. So there are all different approaches that people can take. But one thing to mention is back in 2012, there was a lot of discussion about atheist billboards, and Christians saying atheist billboards are offensive, and maybe we should put up a billboard that said puppies are cute, and at the bottom it would have a website address, like atheist.org or whatever. And I took it one step forward, and I said, well, I think people are offended by the fact that we just advertise. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's an activist from the Harrisburg area, Carl Silverman, and we came up with an idea to put the word atheist, just have the word atheist on a bus ad, So I submitted the advertisement to a local transit agency, the County of Lackawanna Transit System in Scranton, and the ad was declined. They said that it was an attack on religion, that it was denigrating religion, that it was offensive. The solicitor had said some of these things. They were in comment sections. There were interviews that they did with the press. So in that case, just using the word atheist, some thought was offensive. So in some cases, I think, well, no matter how mild the message is, that people are still going to complain about it. But I don't think that gives license to just be over the top. But it's really hard to have this perfect.
People I volunteer with, people I've worked with, friends, just in a supermarket, whatever. And they get to know me, or this would be true of, say, some of my non-believers. And they know us on an ordinary, everyday exchange kind of level. We have a lot of things in common. We think the same, complain about the same things. And the discussion of religion versus atheist never comes up. And then something opens the door to it. Like they'll say something about, maybe would you say a prayer for? And then you just very casually drop the fact that I don't pray because I'm an atheist. It's like right there, you've already sown the seeds that we're basically, all the things that you've been afraid of, you've seen that I'm not that. And I think that kind of opens the door for other people. But yeah, I'll admit it too, I'm also an atheist. And the more it becomes so normalized and visible, little by little, maybe generations to come, it'll be so normal and so that it won't be threatening.
Yeah, and it breaks down the stereotypes too, because if they think, well, I've known this person for 3 years, but at the same time I thought atheists were nasty people, but here I know someone who's not, so there's a cognitive dissonance, the holding the two ideas that are contrary to one another.
Yeah, that's the like the Out campaign started several years ago in the same way the LGBT community said, look, your coworker, your family member is an LGBT and they're not a horrible person. In other words, put a face to it. And it's the same with the Out campaign, the Scarlet A, like you were just talking about. But I wanted to mention that there's people that are religious that get all, like you're just mentioning, get all uptight over challenging them. And there's people on the secular side that get all, they cry over, quote unquote, strident atheists. But like you mentioned, and I remember reading about the billboard ads, the puppy, and just by me saying to religious people, me personally saying, I don't believe in your God or I'm an atheist, is often offensive enough. You don't have to wave flags. You don't have to, you don't have to fling mud at them and insult them. Just by saying that is enough to offend people, to challenge them. And I don't mean that you're deliberately doing that. It's just, like you said, with the cute puppies, atheists, like I remember reading about that. I was like, yes, that's how bad it is. And the one of the things that tied to that is religious fundamentalists extremists fly planes into buildings. They blow up things. This is not just Muslim, Christian. It's all over the world. They do stuff like that, but atheist extremists might argue with you. That's or they might say, I don't agree with you. That's there's really not. There's this false equivalency to Richard Dawkins, Hitchens, the extreme strident atheists to on the other hand, the extremes are people blowing up other people for their faiths.
Yeah. I've seen some examples, though, of atheists giving poor messaging. There was one particular blogger who commented on the movie God Is Not Dead. He was talking about the movie and a scene that happened in it, and spoilers, but one of the main characters in the movie is an atheist, and he ends up in this fatal car crash or something, and he has this conversion, so he gets involved in this accident toward the end of the movie, and Christians pray for him, and he converts at the end of the movie, I think is what happens. And this particular writer, who interestingly enough won a Humanist of the Year award, said that if any Christians were to try to convert him on his deathbed, that he would stab them with a knife. So I didn't find this to be very humanistic or very effective for messaging. Maybe he's being a bit over the top with that or just joking about it, but this person's very critical when people make similar comments and say, well, it's not okay to joke about that, that's not funny, or it's inappropriate or whatever. So that there might be a lot of hypocrisy there, but I just wouldn't be writing something like that. So maybe someone could say, well, an extreme atheist would stab a Christian if they try to convert them into deathbed or something like that. But I don't think that's too common.
Yeah, I think it's, I think you got an uphill battle with trying to persuade people, and for this following reason, is that from our early years, we very curiously seek causes. You hear a noise, even as a child, you turn around, you see something moving, follow it. We seek causes. And even at that very stage, religion comes into the rescue and feeds us these aspects of faith, doctrine, observances which really are exercises in obedience, and so forth. And with that situation, with that barrage, growing up with that behind you, even though you loosen it up as you go along, it rests there at the very bottom. And it comes out from time to time, and you can't help it. Question the situation. But at the same time, if you look as by way of an example, we learn language. Chinese kids learn Chinese kids from youth, and we learn English and so forth and so forth. You try and learn a language as you grow older, and you find you have tremendous difficulty. And the same reason is that you find it more comfortable, it comes natural, those old beliefs. Because dictionary definitions are no more than beliefs. It's an expression, and it's difficult to shake it. And if you want proof of God, it's very simple. They figure, Nietzsche said God is dead. And God said Nietzsche's dead. Who's dead? That's proof of God.
Yeah, well, what I think he meant in that case was that it's not so prevalent in society as it used to be.
True.
Right. Yeah, but there's still a lot of religiosity around, and even what I've seen in people in my age group is it seems to be more of a cafeteria, Catholicism, pluralism kind of thing. No one goes to hell, everyone goes to heaven. Hell is just separation from God, and premarital sex is just fine, and we'll go ahead and do that. Right? There's a lot of dissent from the really fundamentalist brand, and people just kind of making their own religions and saying, well, it's not what's in the books, and the men can be wrong about the books. It's about that personal relationship, and I'll take that up with God.
That's along the thinking of Reverend Bishop John Shelby Spong.
But it's driven by economics, because when people then in the parish start not doing as they're being told and not following a great deal, and the parish reduces the number, economics are changed, and it's felt all the way up there, then of course they decide to be a little bit more liberal, just enough, and just moving with the populace, because that's where the money is. It's economics, just like the causes of most wars. The bottom line, when you chase it out, it's economics.
Yeah, I think this happened a lot with churches changing their stance on LGBT community, for instance. And maybe 20 years from now, we'll start hearing, well, actually, we had a new revelation, and gay marriage is just fine, and anyone should...
The result of the election plates.
Right, yeah. There'll be that. The churches are changing with the times, so this seems to be the message of secularism. Humanism is more effective than that. Even the churches are realizing that. There's a gay pride event in my area that I go to, particularly to deal with the religious protesters. Every year there are usually protesters there with their speakers, and they're blasting this Christian music, and they have their signs and everything. And there are several churches within the event that are saying, well, we're accepting, we're affirming, come to our church. They're all trying to get new converts, which is fine. I mean, that's just what churches do, that's what all sorts of groups do. But it's an interesting sign of the times to see that.
Justin, did you ever consider that for the masses, that there are many people offended waiting to happen? Did you ever hear that?
Oh yeah, well I see that particularly in online circles where people, they have this preset belief, and they're going to see through that lens that any kind of disagreement is going to be attack on their character, that in some cases if, I've seen some people, well, if they're a woman and someone disagreed with them, it's because they're a woman, or if they got fired from a position, it's because they're a woman, or if they, the same thing for men too. I've seen this on some online circles too, when the situation really has nothing to do with it. One really strange comment that I saw about a year and a half ago was this woman was talking about how she felt pressure to go to job interviews with very high heels, that there was this cultural pressure on her to do that. And it was strange because I chatted with people from HR and they said that it would actually be negative if someone went to an interview with high heels because you're going to have to be on your feet a lot of this job. And why are they just trying to impress like that? So they're seeing through this lens that everything has to be about gender, that if they're looking to be offended, they're looking to make this complaint, even though it might not actually be there.
Yeah, I've made a phone call just today to apologize, listen to this, to apologize to somebody who made an offensive remark to me. And I amazed myself, because this is what I'm up to, that I am responsible, not to blame or fault, that I did something for him to say something very disrespectful. And it wasn't easy for me to make that call, but I'll tell you, it ended up wonderfully.
Yeah, well, intention, I think, is really important, especially when people have different values. There was a disagreement I had with a coworker a few weeks ago. I enjoy playing games Scrabble, and I explained to her she wants to play me in an online game. I explained to her I'm not really interested in online games. It's very much different than an in-person game. People use dictionaries, people just put words on the board trying to make words, and I prefer to play a game where it's just our knowledge, not outside knowledge. And I explained many, many things I didn't like about the online game compared to the in-person game. And I said, okay, well, I'll play online anyway. And I did. And I happened to resign the second game. She was playing many words that I thought that she did not know. She was taking a long time to take her turns, even though she agreed to focus on the game center. This went on. It's a really seemingly trivial thing. And in the second game, I typed in the chat box, I can't catch up, I resign, I'm way behind. And what I learned through my play of chess when I was in high school and my study of the game was that it's actually a sign of respect to resign to your opponent. You're not wasting their time, you just want to move on to the next game, right? So this was my thought, that it's respectful to do that. And I explained in the chat box that I resigned because I was so far behind. And she explained to me that it was very disrespectful that I did that. And I explained to her what my thoughts on resigning were, and I informed her about it. And I asked her, why is it that you felt it was so disrespectful? We had the conversation. And I actually ended up apologizing. I said, well, I wasn't aware of that. Maybe I could have handled the situation better.
So why didn't you say no in the first place?
Yeah, I just wanted to make an exception.
Well,
So anymore, there will be no online Scrabble games. There will be zero.
No Scrabulous?
people are so afraid to say no. You know, and
We
it costs us.
were going to play that day. She said she wasn't available. Oh, but I could play you later. I just won't be able to play face to face. I said, all right, fine.
Well, I'll teach you how to say no without saying no. Would you like to know? No.
In other cases, I generally will.
There's another question.
There's a question.
Not so much a
You might
question, well, it is kind of a question. In my experience, mostly the hardest nut to crack, so far we've been talking in terms of like an individual, having a conversation with an individual, and strictly what they would think, what they would be convinced of, or what they're defending. But don't most people live in really as part of a big group or sets of groups where what they're defending, they might actually, at some level, be convinced by what you're saying. But there's a part of them that has to very staunchly defend their connections to their groups, to their families, to their church, to their, whatever it is. And that, I think, is probably maybe the hardest thing to get past.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting. A friend that I know who's about my age, I'm 25, she said that her mother saw me in the news a few years ago and more recently with my protesting, my activism, and her mother doesn't like me. And she was explaining to her mother who she lives with that, oh, I'm going to be meeting with Justin. Oh, you're meeting with him? And stuff like that. So she gets that kind of reaction where her mother is so upset about the fact that I'm friends with her. And And when religious people say, well, what's the harm in religion? I say one of the first things I'll mention is the animosity that people have toward one another. That's like the result of their religious belief. And I'll explain this to people, to the apathetic atheists or humanists out there, why bother, why be active about these things. That's typically one reason I would give. But anyway, they'll want to defend those familial connections, and it will be seen as a betrayal. If they grew up in a tradition and they happen to veer from it, that could be seen as a betrayal. And I could tell people, well, you don't necessarily have to be public about it. You can go to meetings, you can work behind the scenes, you can be anonymous. The internet makes it very easy to be anonymous today. Anyone can just start a blog, right? Anyone can just get on a website, make videos. You can mask your voice. You can not show up on a webcam. There are a lot of ways around it. You can use your talents to contribute